The year was 1889. Paris was a city on the cusp of a new century, alive with the marvels of the Exposition Universelle. Yet on this particular evening, the city's brilliance was muted. A persistent autumn rain fell from a sky the color of slate, turning the cobblestone streets into dark, shimmering mirrors. Gas lamps sputtered against the damp, their golden halos struggling to pierce the thick, rolling fog that crept from the Seine. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of wet leaves and coal smoke. It was a night when shadows seemed to stretch and deepen, clinging to the ornate facades of the grand Haussmannian buildings. An atmosphere of quiet unease settled over the French capital, a premonition that not all was as it seemed. This was not the Paris of vibrant art salons and cheerful boulevards. This was a different city, one that existed in the quiet hours after midnight. It was a place of hidden anxieties and unspoken fears, where the grandeur of the Exposition could not entirely mask the city's older, darker heart. The clatter of a lone horse-drawn fiacre echoed through the deserted streets, its sound swallowed by the oppressive mist. Each corner turned seemed to reveal another labyrinth of narrow, winding lanes, where history and secrets were layered as thickly as the grime on the ancient stone. The city felt watchful, its countless windows like vacant eyes staring into the gloom. Within this spectral landscape, a carriage made its slow, deliberate way toward the heart of the city. Inside, two figures sat huddled together, weary from a long and arduous journey. They were a mother and her young daughter, recently arrived from India, seeking the medical expertise of Parisian doctors. The mother, a woman named Mrs. Marlowe, peered out at the rain-streaked scenery, her face etched with a mixture of fatigue and concern for her ailing child. The daughter, meanwhile, rested her head against her mother's shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. The journey had been taxing, and all they desired was the comfort of a warm bed. Their destination was a respectable, if not overly grand, hotel near the city centre. It stood as a bastion of bourgeois comfort, its windows glowing with a welcoming amber light. As their carriage pulled to a stop before the entrance, a uniformed doorman hurried out, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows across the wet pavement. The hotel promised respite, a temporary sanctuary from the sprawling, indifferent city and the creeping chill of the night. It appeared solid, dependable, a place where a tired mother and her sick daughter could find peace. But some buildings, like people, hold secrets within their walls, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. The hotel lobby was an island of warmth and light against the bleakness of the night. A fire crackled merrily in a large marble fireplace, its flames reflecting in the polished wood of the front desk and the brass fittings of the gasoliers overhead. The air smelled of beeswax, old leather, and the faint, sweet scent of cigar smoke. A clerk, a man with a meticulously groomed moustache and tired eyes, looked up as the bell above the door announced their arrival. Mrs. Marlowe, supporting her daughter, approached the desk with a sense of profound relief. The long journey from the port was finally over. They were safe. She spoke to the clerk in careful, though slightly accented French. She explained their situation, the long travel, her daughter's fragile health. She requested 2 adjoining rooms, one for herself and one for her daughter, so she could remain close by. The clerk listened patiently, his expression one of polite professionalism. He consulted a large, leather-bound ledger, running his finger down a column of names and numbers. After a moment, he nodded. Yes, such rooms were available. He assured her they were quiet, facing the inner courtyard, away from the noise of the street. He pushed the registration book toward her. With a trembling hand, Mrs. Marlowe signed her name and that of her daughter. The clerk then summoned a bellboy, a young lad with a serious face, to show them to their accommodations. He also arranged for the hotel doctor to be called, a necessary precaution given the girl's condition. As they followed the bellboy toward the grand, sweeping staircase, Mrs. Marlowe felt a wave of gratitude. The staff seemed so efficient, so understanding. The hotel felt like a haven. Her daughter, leaning heavily on her, managed a weak smile, her eyes taking in the opulent surroundings with a flicker of youthful curiosity. Their rooms were on the 2nd floor, down a long corridor carpeted in a deep crimson runner that muffled their footsteps. The bellboy unlocked 2 adjacent doors, revealing spaces that were comfortably furnished, if a little dated. Each room had a heavy mahogany bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a single window draped in thick velvet curtains. The doctor soon arrived, a kindly grey-haired man who examined the girl and prescribed a sedative to ensure she rested peacefully. He spoke with Mrs. Marlowe in hushed tones, reassuring her that a good night's sleep was the best medicine for now. Finally, the mother was alone with her daughter, the silence of the hotel wrapping around them like a blanket. Mrs. Marlowe settled her daughter into the bed in the adjacent room. She smoothed the crisp linen sheets and tucked the blanket snugly around her child, who was already drifting into a medicated slumber. She placed a glass of water on the bedside table and left the door between their two rooms slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light connecting them. Returning to her own room, she prepared for bed, her body aching with the accumulated fatigue of many days. The city outside was quiet now, the rain having softened to a gentle patter against the window pane. The last thing she remembered was the soft glow of the gas lamp in the hallway, casting a pale line of light under her door. Morning arrived, not with a burst of sunlight, but with a pale grey light that filtered weakly through the heavy curtains. Mrs. Marlowe awoke slowly, a groggy sense of disorientation clinging to her. For a moment she simply lay there, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the hotel, the distant clatter of crockery, the muffled footsteps in the hallway. Then, a sudden sharp awareness cut through her sleepy haze. It was the silence, the profound, complete silence from the next room. There was no sound of her daughter stirring, no soft cough, no gentle breathing. An icy tendril of fear began to curl in her stomach. She threw back the covers and hurried to the adjoining door, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs. She pushed it open, expecting to see her daughter sleeping peacefully. The room was empty. The bed, which she had so carefully prepared the night before, was made. The sheets were pristine, the pillows plumped, as if no one had ever slept in it. A cold draft seemed to emanate from the space, which felt strangely sterile and unused. There was no glass of water on the bedside table. There was no sign that her daughter or anyone had ever been there at all. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She searched the room frantically, her hands shaking. She looked in the wardrobe, under the bed, behind the curtains. It was a futile effort. The room was small, with nowhere for a person to hide. Her daughter was gone. Her luggage, the small trunk containing her clothes and personal items, had also vanished. It was as if she had been erased. Mrs. Marlowe's breath came in ragged gasps. She ran back into her own room, her mind racing. Had she been moved? Had the hotel staff taken her to a hospital without telling her? She pulled on her dressing gown and rushed out into the hallway, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. The nightmare had just begun. Bursting from her room, Mrs. Marlowe ran down the long, empty corridor toward the main staircase. Her bare feet were cold against the crimson runner. Her only thought was to find the front desk, to find someone who could explain this impossible situation. She found the same clerk from the previous night, the man with the neat moustache, calmly sorting through a stack of mail. She rushed toward him, her voice trembling as she demanded to know where her daughter was. She asked if the doctor had returned, if her child had been moved during the night. She was met with a blank, uncomprehending stare. The clerk looked at her with an expression of mild confusion, mixed with a hint of professional concern for what he clearly perceived as a hysterical guest. "Your daughter, madame?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. "I'm afraid you must be mistaken. You arrived alone last night." He gestured to the large, open registration book on the desk. "You see, you booked a single room. There is only one signature." Mrs. Marlowe stared at the ledger, her eyes wide with disbelief. There, on the page she had signed, was only her name. The space next to it, where she was certain she had written her daughter's name, was blank. The ink looked old, dry, undisturbed. Her denial was immediate and desperate. She insisted she had come with her daughter, that they had been given 2 rooms, that a doctor had been called. She described the bellboy, the doctor, the adjoining room. The clerk listened with practiced patience, then shook his head slowly. He claimed to have no memory of such events. He informed her that the room next to hers had been occupied by another guest, a German gentleman who had checked out early that morning. He then called over other members of the staff, the doorman, a chambermaid, the bellboy she recognized. One by one, they all denied seeing her with a child. Mrs. Marlowe's world began to fracture. Was she going mad? Had she imagined it all? The journey, her daughter's illness, their arrival? The faces of the staff seemed to swim before her eyes, their expressions a mixture of pity and suspicion. They treated her with a cool, detached courtesy that was more unnerving than open hostility. They spoke to her in placating tones, suggesting she was overwrought from her travels and should return to her room to rest. Their collective denial was a solid, impenetrable wall. She was a lone voice crying out in a wilderness of calm, rational opposition. Her sanity had been put on trial, and she was losing. As Mrs. Marlowe's pleas grew more frantic, the hotel's stance hardened. The manager was summoned, a stern and imposing figure who listened to her story with a deep frown. He was polite, but dismissive, reiterating what his staff had already told her. There was no record of her daughter. No doctor had been called by the hotel. The room next to hers had not been hers to use. He suggested, not unkindly, that the strain of her journey had perhaps created a moment of confusion. The implication was clear. She was deluded, a hysteric, a woman whose mind had buckled under pressure. The official story of the hotel was set in stone. Driven from the hotel by a wall of unshakable denial, Mrs. Marlowe took her desperate story to the Parisian authorities. She found herself in a series of dim, bureaucratic offices, repeating her account to skeptical police officials. They listened, they took notes, but their actions were, lethargic. An inquiry was made at the hotel, of course, but the hotel's perfect records, the unified testimony of its staff, and the lack of any physical evidence to support her claim left the police with little to pursue. To them, she was just another distressed woman, possibly suffering from grief or mental exhaustion. Her case was filed away, a minor curiosity in a city filled with countless daily dramas. But outside the official channels, her story began to seep into the city's bloodstream. It became a rumor, a whisper shared in smoky cafes and crowded market squares. Paris in 1889 was a city rife with gossip and paranoia, especially with the influx of foreigners for the exposition. Whispers began to circulate about the grand hotels and their secrets. Some said that the city was in the grip of a secret plague, perhaps a resurgence of cholera brought in by foreign visitors. In this version of the tale, the hotel, fearing a panic that would ruin business and shut down the exposition, had discreetly disposed of the sick girl's body and conspired to erase her existence. Other, darker theories emerged from the city's political undercurrents. It was a time of international tension and espionage. Some whispered that the mother and daughter were not who they seemed. Perhaps they were political refugees or spies carrying sensitive information. In this telling, the daughter had been abducted by government agents, French or foreign, and the hotel staff had been silenced, either through threats or bribery, to participate in the cover-up. The vanishing girl became a symbol of the city's hidden dangers, a warning that beneath the glittering surface of the Belle Epoque, a sinister world of conspiracy and state-sanctioned crime was at work. Returning to the hotel was an act of grim determination. Mrs. Marlowe refused to leave, clinging to the last place she had seen her child. She paid for her room day after day, becoming a spectral presence within the building. The staff now treated her with a cautious distance, their earlier pity curdling into suspicion and annoyance. She would wander the corridors at night, a solitary figure draped in shadow, listening at doors and peering down the long, empty stretches of hallway. The hotel, once a symbol of refuge, had transformed into her personal prison, a labyrinth of memory and loss where every corner held a taunting echo. The sensory details of that first night became her obsession. She tried to recapture the exact quality of the gaslight as it flickered on the walls, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to dance and writhe like living things. She would stand for hours in the corridor outside the room that was not hers, the room where her daughter had slept, trying to hear a ghostly echo of the child's breathing. The deep crimson of the carpet seemed to her a bloody stain, and the polished wood of the doors reflected her own haunted face back at her, distorted and pale. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant clang of a pipe, became a potential clue or a cruel trick of the mind. Her nights were sleepless, filled with the torment of half-remembered sounds. Did she hear a faint, distorted cry carried on the night air, or was it merely the wind whistling through the eaves of the old building? She would sit bolt upright in bed, straining to listen, her heart hammering in the oppressive silence. The faint scent of the doctor's antiseptic, which she was sure had lingered in the room, was now gone, replaced by the mundane hotel smells of polish and stale air. She began to doubt her own senses. The line between what was real and what she had imagined or desperately wished for began to blur into an indistinguishable haze. The other guests in the hotel began to notice her. They saw her as the mad Englishwoman, a ghost haunting the second floor. They would fall silent when she entered a room, their conversations turning to whispers as she passed. She saw them watching her from behind their newspapers in the lounge, their eyes filled with a morbid curiosity. Their judgment was a constant, unspoken pressure, reinforcing the hotel's narrative that she was unstable. She was utterly alone, isolated by her grief and by a conspiracy of silence that was either terrifyingly real or a figment of her own breaking mind. The hotel's echoing corridors became a perfect metaphor for her own internal state, empty, resonant, and filled with phantoms. In her desperate search for proof, Mrs. Marlowe clung to the few tangible items that connected her to her daughter. She had in her possession a small, leather-bound diary her daughter had kept during their voyage from India to France. She presented this to the police, showing them the childish script detailing their journey. The final entry, written just before they left the port city for Paris, read, "Mama says we will be in Paris soon. I hope the doctor can make me well." To the authorities, this proved only that she had a daughter, not that the daughter had ever set foot in the Hotel Ambassadeur. It was a piece of a puzzle with the most crucial part missing. Among her own belongings, she discovered what she believed to be a crucial piece of evidence. It was a small, crumpled piece of paper, a prescription note from the doctor who had visited them on that first night. The handwriting was hasty, almost illegible, and it prescribed a common sedative. The name of the patient was not clearly written. It was a scrawl that could be interpreted in several ways. When she presented this note to the hotel manager and later to the police, it was dismissed. There was no record of that doctor ever being associated with the hotel, and the note itself was undated and unsigned with a full, verifiable name. It was another phantom, a piece of paper that proved nothing. The archives of the Prefecture of Police in Paris even today hold a thin file on the matter. It is catalogued under Unverified Disappearances, 1889. The file contains a summary of Mrs. Marlowe's initial complaint, noted with a weary professionalism. It includes a transcript of the interview with the hotel manager, who calmly stated that the woman was distraught and confused. A brief handwritten addendum by the investigating officer concludes, "No evidence of foul play, no evidence a second party was ever present. The complainant appears to be suffering from severe mental distress. Case closed." The official record cemented the narrative of madness. Whispers and rumors, however, do not require official sanction. Decades later, a story surfaced in a collection of Parisian folklore. It spoke of a chambermaid from that very hotel who, on her deathbed, confessed a dark secret. She claimed the staff had been sworn to silence. The girl had died suddenly during the night, not from a common illness, but from a highly contagious disease. Fearing a citywide panic during the exposition, the manager, in collusion with powerful men, had the body secretly removed before dawn. The room was scrubbed, the records altered, and the staff threatened into silence. It was a story told without proof, a ghost story passed down through generations, another phantom on paper. Days turned into weeks, and Mrs. Marlowe remained at the hotel, a prisoner of her own grief and obsession. Her initial frantic energy gave way to a hollow, haunting quietude. She ceased her nightly wanderings, instead confining herself to her room, where she would sit for hours, staring at the wall that separated her from the space where her daughter had vanished. The world outside her window, the vibrant, celebrating Paris of the exposition, seemed like a distant, alien planet. Her reality had shrunk to the size of her hotel room, a space that felt both like a tomb and the scene of a terrible, unprovable crime. Her grip on reality, already tenuous, began to slip further. She started to have conversations with her absent daughter, her whispers echoing in the silent room. She would set a place for her at her small table when meals were brought up, only to leave the food untouched. The hotel staff, observing this through fleeting glances when they delivered her tray, saw it as confirmation of her complete mental collapse. They no longer saw a grieving mother, but a woman lost to her own delusions. Their pity had evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical detachment. She was no longer a guest to be served, but a problem to be managed. The strain of her ordeal took a visible toll. Her face grew gaunt, her eyes sunken and shadowed, filled with a permanent expression of bewilderment and sorrow. She neglected her appearance, her clothes often rumpled, her hair unkempt. She was a ghost of the elegant woman who had arrived weeks earlier. At times, moments of lucidity would cut through the fog of her despair. In these moments, she would be struck by a terrifying doubt. What if they were right? What if she had, in some fugue of grief and exhaustion, invented the entire episode? This possibility was, in some ways, more terrifying than the conspiracy she imagined. Eventually, the funds she had brought with her ran out. The hotel manager, his patience finally exhausted, had her evicted. She was put out onto the streets of Paris with her few remaining belongings, a lone, broken figure against the backdrop of the indifferent city. Reports from the time are scarce, but it is believed she was eventually committed to a public asylum, her story dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman. Her identity, her history, her desperate search, all were subsumed by a clinical diagnosis. The system had found a neat and tidy explanation for the impossible, and in doing so, it had erased not one, but two people. The daughter who vanished, and the mother who refused to forget her. What became of Mrs. Marlowe is lost to history. Whether she spent the rest of her days in an asylum, forever pleading her case to unhearing ears, or simply vanished into the anonymity of the city, no one can say. Her story, unsupported by fact and dismissed by authority, faded from official memory. But it did not disappear entirely. It slipped through the cracks of recorded history and took root in the fertile soil of urban legend. The tale of the vanishing hotel room became a classic Parisian ghost story, a chilling anecdote whispered to travelers for generations to come. The legend has been told and retold in countless variations. The setting sometimes changes, from Paris to another bustling European capital. The year shifts, the names are altered, but the core elements remain hauntingly consistent. A mother and child, a sudden disappearance, and a conspiracy of silence. It speaks to a deep and primal fear, the fear of not being believed, of having one's own reality denied by a hostile world. Is there any terror greater than being the sole witness to a crime that everyone insists never happened? The story forces us to question the very nature of memory and sanity. Over the century that followed, investigators and folklorists have tried to find a definitive origin for the tale. Some have searched for the hotel, the police records, any shred of concrete evidence that could anchor the legend in fact. But the search has always been fruitless. No hotel named Ambassadeur from that period matches the story perfectly. No police file corroborates the dramatic events. This lack of proof, however, has only added to the story's power. It exists in a liminal space between fact and fiction, a mystery that can never be solved because its key components may never have been real. And so, the question lingers, as persistent as the Parisian fog on that autumn night in 1889. Was Mrs. Marlowe a victim of a cruel and elaborate conspiracy, a cover-up designed to protect the city's reputation during a moment of national pride? Or was she a victim of her own fragile mind, a woman whose grief and fatigue manifested as a vivid, unshakable delusion? Did a young girl truly vanish from a locked hotel room, erased from history by powerful forces? Or did she only ever exist in the desperate heart of her mother? The story endures because it offers no easy answers, leaving us alone with the chilling uncertainty, forever haunted by the silence from the empty room.